All right. So we'll start with Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. And then we see how things work. From the heart of the server of the 100 deities of the Shita on the peak of cloud resembling a clap of extremely white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, omniscient Losam Drakpa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me on the lion throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme fill of merit from a mind of faith, please abide for 100 eons to spread the teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech with its excellent explanations is its ear ornament for those of good fortune. Your holy body is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you who are meaningful to see, hear, and remember are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, lights, scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated, I offer to you the supreme fill of Mary. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I have collected from beginningless time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age of making your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the 8 worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billion clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dhammakaya, please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. May whatever virtue I have collected benefit the teachings and transmigrated beings, and in particular may it cause the essence of perfect, pure, Losam Drakpa's teachings to shine forever. Sa shi po ki ju chi me do ram ri ra ling shi ni de ge ba di san ge shin du me te wa hi ro ku nam da Shin la chu pa sho. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 sons, may I and my family members and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Losam Drakpa, where the morality of an eminently pure way of life was courageous in the extensive conduct of the sons of the victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of 2 stages into supreme bliss and emptiness. Idang Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beings of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one, enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of 2 of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit hums, negative karmas, obscurations, and the imprints without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. So we're going to do the 5-line mixima in page 13. Mi metse we chechen zi jime kembe wambo jambe yan dubu malo jomze sanwe da kanje kembe tsuge tsongkapa Losam Drakpa shabla sowa de mi metse we te chechen zi jime kembe wambo jambe dubu malo jomze sanwe da kanje kembe tsuge tsongkapa Losam Drakpa shabla sowa de mi metse we te chechen zi jime kembe wambo jambe yan dubu malo jomze sanwe da Kanchen Gembe Tsugen Tsongkapa Losam Drakpa Shabla Sowa De.
Sangi Chedon Tsogi Chonam La Chanchu Badu Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chishegi Betsonangi Drolam Penche Sangi Trupa Sho Sanji
Chodan
Chodan
Tsoki
Toji
Chonam
Chonamla
La
Chanchu
Chanchu
Bardu
Badu
Dani
Dani
Kapsu
Kapsuchi
Chi Dagi
Dagi
Chushi
Chushegi
Gibi Tong
Betsonangi Drola
Drolam Peshe
Penche
Sanjin
Sangye
Drupara
Drupasho
Sho Sanji Chodan
Chodan
Toji
Tsoki Chonam
Chonamla
La
Chanchu
Chanchu Badu
Bardu
Dani
Dani Kapsu
Kapsuchi
Dagi
Dagi
Chushi
Chushegi
Gibi
Betsonangi
Tonangi Drolam
Drola
Peshe
Penche
Sanjin
Sangye
Drupara
Drupasho.
Sho 강기 투쟁이 손에 따와 덤제 밤비체를 담비 춘된제 고덤 제라 찬세로 Good morning everyone. See you. 그 같은 참 되는 막 쉬쉬하고 있어. 먼저 람람 참디 디서던데 시버디 신드만 거니 겹스트스 세팅스다 시버니스 넘버다 치위 땜바다 그래.
네.
야 치위 땜바다 텔레로번 남지 초면시니 건조스물 겹순 진기 대다든 민팀비 땜버솔 겹순 진보스.
We're looking at Lamaton Kappa's milling presentation of the states of the path of enlightenment. We're currently looking at a topic of going for refuge in covering, we've covered the first 2 points in the main outline consisting of 4 points. So we looked at the causes for going for refuge, identifying the objects of refuge. Now we're looking at the 3rd point, which explains the way that we go for refuge. So in relation to the way that we go for refuge, today we're going to pick up from the following section. Let's put it on the screen. So going for refuge and not advocating other objects of refuge. It says, having understood the superiority and inferiority of Buddhist, non-Buddhist teachers, teachings, and students respectively, you consider the 3 jewels alone to be a refuge and do not consider teachers and so forth who are incompatible with them to be a refuge.
그래서다 젠드만 요거니 겹수 로투스는다 겹수 진출티 저다 내가 전부배 차고요래서 먼저 겸주 카드를 내가 치시 yanti nenga di mashibayna chik yenji ki sodo thombayna ani da nyebare was ro sem nyeba chang di nenga di yenji minji ta shingoya di ani zo chag dos.
So this is a crucial point to understand with respect to going for refuge without advocating other objects of refuge. Here, if a sense of division, divisiveness creeps into our mind, it's a fault. So we want to make sure that while we do not advocate other objects of refuge, still our mental attitude is not divisive.
Terenganzu kyamru gi tsawa kyamru dunju bi nanglo la ya sanji chodan gendun di tarwan deban nam ki kyabs song yoros ra sanji chodan gendun di tarwan deban nam ki kyabs la za danda kyab choya gi godun nimbo de tarwa da tamjin kim bi sala ya drobi chedu kyab choyo yoros ra denza kyab chosa gi yul di gi tawa da tamjin kim bi komban la ya tik tungi shibachi 탑 땡이 시바지 로 딘디젤이야 캡 맞춰봐나 아니 비 고든 인부디 drugu 말아왔어 딘자 아니 캡스 진 고사들이야 캡스 진 아니 모고사들이야 캡 맞춰봐 딘디지기 캡아 drugu 연자 아니 타와드 탐진 김비 공부 통인디 로 타블럼 신주 말로 땡이디 수착을 했으라디 넘버 샤점문이 바디 다 먹고 말했어. 로 델리 셴비 다직 아주 출력 망부여리 템버 망부여리 이제 두수기 아니 타바드 탐진 캠비기 살려 조수기 람기 름바디 땡그레스나 자원이 된 거만 시우스 얘기하러스 진짜 아니 좀된 디기 손샤비기 타와드 탐지 김비기 살레 로고도나 좀된 디 코나레 때디고 까법 다가는 차그면서 디순고 그랬어 마도 인지 지기요 말했어.
So here, rather than adopting a divisive attitude between different religions, different spiritual traditions, we first of all identify what the purpose is of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. As it is said in scripture, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are objects of refuge for those who desire liberation. Which means if you wish for liberation, or if you wish for the state of omniscience, the state of Buddhahood, you go for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. And that, for example, we recognize the Buddha as the teacher, an object of refuge for us, to be the one who taught the refuge. So we go for refuge to the Buddha if our goal, our hope, our wishes are to attain the state of enlightenment or the state of liberation. Which means that we go for refuge to these objects of refuge that have the ability to show us the way, to guide us along the path that proceeds to our own state of liberation or the state of enlightenment. So if you seek an object of refuge in keeping those goals in your mind, and those objects of refuge are incapable of leading the way, showing you the way to attain the state of enlightenment or liberation, they do not become objects of refuge for you if they cannot do it, if they do not show the path to you. So then when we look at other religions or other spiritual traditions around the world, different teachers, different spiritual leaders, of course, they propound their own tenets and their own spiritual path, but we look at them in terms of whether they promote the state of liberation or enlightenment, whether it is going to bring your own personal goal, or those religion, spiritual traditions will bring your own personal goal of attaining the state of liberation and enlightenment. So if in other traditions, or if you rely upon other traditions to don't bring about your personal goal, which is the attainment of the state of liberation or enlightenment, then for you, they don't become objects of refuge. So rather than discriminating them or being divisive and saying that they're not good or what have you, we just look at our own goals. If they do not advocate the state of liberation or enlightenment to the path to liberation or enlightenment, for us, they do not become objects of refuge.
데리다 베나 베친 중으로 샤바는 간주 카슈 콤바이나 비기 다치 추다 딘지기 리래야 땡레마도 사콜라 땡바이나 자원이니 아니 카콤에데 세토 마로스 딘전 드규게 탈비 공반다 탐진 김비 공반 되친젤야 땡사디 게이 토비기 탑된 통해 시발기 아니 땡바질래야 땡고야디 고 우여 차고레스로.
Just to illustrate that with an analogy, if you're very thirsty, then you can use water in order to quench your thirst. If you're going to drink a salty liquid, it's not going to help you out. So similarly here, if what you seek is liberation or enlightenment, you need to rely upon objects of refuge that have the ability to lead you along the stages for the attainment of liberation or enlightenment.
먼저 탈바슬라온디 둥하 규다 제발리 탈바나 탈바세고라스 이제 둥하 문지온디 둥하 숨 먼저지 아니 둥하 쯤마임바 로 아니 규둥하 아니 캬바 뒤지 둥하스 생하시 탐젤레 캬브제 중 둥하 디츠 문진지니 디 자와시온디 디 규시온디 아니 차당 모선이야 뚝지 디 자와 마리바 쳔남기 내루 대관은이야 신줄로도 슈딩기 마리바 디 자와치는 동안 딩기 예비 남샤 송인디 아니 좀된디 딱 냐직리와스 데스우쇼 딘지미 신고그라스라 딘자 안 딘지 동안 겨다 제발레 타발야 자와 차당 모선 본거야 디 자와 마리바 본거야 마리바긴 전당다 무슨 강인디 쳔남기 내루 대관은이 또비 다음에버 또비 로디임바 이제 딜레야 콤디 치고야 레야 다음에버 문즈 치고야 아니 다음에버 디 리비 남전 타입이고는 수된 거랬으나 좀 된 되기 때문에 건자 디 코나라에 된 거야디 공무유 제거랬어. 이제 디 아니 다가란 송에 수여 봐야냐. 로 데라 르기 이치치나 디거랬어. 그래서 디 좀 된 되기 겹줄 제거 말도 디 간다 제거 말았어. 디 마힘 바질이야. 아니 타바드 탐진기 공부 토야게 체도 겹줄 봐야나. 아니 노르고레스. 디 캬바디 nembuchin song de zu tel tugors ra.
So we say that the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha are objects of refuge for those who desire liberation. So we also need to just be able to, for the time being at least, on a small scale, be able to identify what liberation is. Liberation is freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. And since it is freedom from suffering and the causes for suffering, we need to be able to recognize what constitutes suffering. So suffering is not only suffering of suffering or manifest sensation of suffering. We go deeper than that in looking at two other types of suffering: suffering of change and pervasive suffering of conditionality. So liberation is freedom from all of them, freedom from suffering of suffering, but also from suffering of change and pervasive suffering of conditionality. And on top of that, also the recognition of what constitutes the causes for suffering and freedom from those causes of suffering. So the causes for suffering are afflictive states of mind. The three poisonous afflictions: anger, attachment, and ignorance. Anger and attachment, those afflictive states of mind, are based on ignorance, which erroneously perceives reality. It engages reality erroneously. And this is what the Buddha taught as the cause for suffering. And the Buddha, it seems that was the only teacher, or was alone in propounding that the different varieties of suffering that we experience arise from certain causes, afflictive states of mind. And the foundation of all of them is ignorance, which misconstrues reality. So the Buddha said that in order then to abandon the suffering that we experience, we need to abandon the causes for suffering. We need to abandon the root of our suffering, which are afflictive states of mind like anger and attachment. In order to abandon anger and attachment, we need to abandon ignorance, which apprehends or engages reality erroneously. And the way to abandon that ignorance is to develop the wisdom that realizes selflessness. It is a wisdom that realizes the way that things are. And this is what the Buddha, the teacher, taught us how to develop wisdom that realizes selflessness. So in that sense, if we look at our goals are to attain, or our goal is to attain the state of liberation from suffering and the cause of suffering. And the fundamental cause of suffering is ignorance that engages reality erroneously. And in order to abandon that, we need to develop the wisdom that realizes selflessness. So you rely upon teachers, and if the teacher that you rely upon teaches you how to develop the wisdom that realizes selflessness in order to eliminate your afflictive states of mind, so that on that basis you'd be able to attain the state of liberation, then this is a suitable person to rely upon, since that person agrees with your goals. Whereas if the person does not teach you how to do so, then for you, they do not become an object of refuge. If they do not lead you to the state of liberation, then for you, they do not become the objects of refuge. And this is the purpose of this section that explains how you go for refuge through not advocating other objects of refuge which are not in line with your spiritual goals.
And the Sawanin Songuyo Mares, there are this Songo Mares, Kansna, Chadang Anzoge, Benata Chik Mepenzu in a Chichilea, and then capture Drogoras Ra. Pena Drogoto Cadulea, Kalala capture Tichugor, Dico Muyuras Ra. Any Umpong Gage John Denlea capture or Dindri, any Mitzi 수수 메지 되기 된바 용약 쳇 메진 디 쳇도 아니 지 미셴발이야 캡주야 아니 지 직된빌 하든딜이야 캡주야 제 초고르스디 정말 싸우니 순거 말았으라 때 이나야 단지시와 난신기 캡주스디 고 로가레스 디 인지민이 신고야 지
Now, this section doesn't say in general that we're not allowed to seek protection in anything else. The meaning of seeking refuge is to seek a sense of protection. So it doesn't mean that we are not allowed to seek a sense of protection in other things in general. Like, for example, when you're hungry, you might seek refuge or you might be protected by food. If you're poor, you might seek the protection of those that can help you out, someone that is better off. When we're looking for pleasures or happiness in this life, we might seek refuge of the protection of others. And this is completely okay, right? So we seek refuge in that sense in general. So when this section says that we shouldn't promote or we shouldn't advocate other objects of refuge, it doesn't refer to those general things that we do in order to find some sense of security or protection in this life.
어디니직 그래서 드니 다 가서 다 템버 망부여 반자 전화 가서 다 타워드 탐지게 뭐 산지 제수 주고여 반자 안직 비게 산지기 추줄 텔레 아니 로스 비게 따드 로스 아니 챙일이야 또 마구나 때 마구나 로 다 페시 약슈 간스나 아니 야 간주 샘디 코 템부 메반자 단다 녜바 야부지 녜메바인자 아니 규리야기 로 규리야기 로신줄로든 로야기 녜가 여반자 아니 지 딘딜이야 때마구나 약슈레스 간스 산지 추엘야 라원디 산지 추디 베기 소수기 녜바니 송바이나 아니 셈바 카르라 때바이나야 코 녜바니 사비젤라 샘딘 교르투 마로스 마동 안주 녜바 마니 코 아니 지 베기 소수 지 일라 바부로다 나주로 지 얌센저 통디 아니 람상 아니 로디 규드야디 안주 레 탐보와라 아니 베슈크 쳔보 요르와스 로 저 딘디 카울야 아니 지 망부 메바 그 산지 추랑라야 장 어두스 로투바나 아니 덴덴 케바 연구였어리스
There are many teachers, many spiritual leaders belonging to different traditions. And when we consider our goal, again, if our goal is to attain the state of liberation and enlightenment, then we regard ourselves as followers of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, who taught us the Dhamma, which means a certain set of teachings that is supposed to be leading us to a state of liberation. Now, there are those that belong to other traditions, and they might give you other sets of teachings, other Dhamma, so to speak. So if we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have to rely upon other sets of Dhamma, in some sense, you can say that it puts us in a better situation, because if it is something that is opposite to what the Dhamma teaches, it is likely to take us away from our spiritual goal, which is the attainment of the state of liberation. So currently, as you can say that for many of us, if not all of us, we still can regard ourselves as beginners in the Buddha Dhamma. If we haven't found yet that sense of certainty and conviction in the Dhamma, it means that our mind is still susceptible to looking around and finding conviction or trust in other things. And if those things are opposite to the path that the Dhamma shows, the path that is leading to the state of liberation, and the state of liberation is what we seek, it is likely that things that are opposite to what the Dhamma teach will not lead us to the state of liberation. So in that sense, if we don't have to rely upon them at the moment, then it's best not to. So it's a good point to make, because we might find ourselves in a situation when we look at different sets of teachings and we might find them exciting or interesting, amazing, and so forth. And at a time of not really finding that sense of conviction or trust in a certain path that we follow in order to attain the state of liberation, we might become captivated by something that looks to our mind to be really interesting. And as such, if it is not teaching the path that proceeds to the state of liberation, it means that our mind will not transform, will not change to a state in which it allows us to attain the state of liberation. So for this reason, here this section is saying that if you have relied upon the objects of refuge, the Buddha and Dhamma and Sangha, then do not advocate other objects of refuge, which means those that do not have the ability to lead you to the state of liberation.
아니 산기 람된 나샤기기 다 뎀바 실라 소바 라 람탑신이라 소바 델뎀비 제부꾼이 세디 베기게 인지민지 켈렌 곳을 산기 코랑 송요 말아 디페 니지부 라 자란스 심죽체셔스 딱지야 우체네 오니 무윤내수단 톰바지 렌도나 아니 냠네 체스 디메나 인지민 최고요 말했어 디송라서라 덴자 모연네 수세디 아니 간수 심주지 딱지 제바나 간줄에 미 레바 여연자 비 랭이 넘버 제토에 뉴바티는 간줄 여레스 아니 비 율 모연네 수때네 라트에 유지그레스 덴자 딩이 라트 바이나 데니 아니 수무그 수직 셰바이나야 아니 샘라야 요드고 말레스 람신지 말로 돌이야 루트그레스 수수 네번 많이 고 아니 지 네번 많이 이제 싸마지 말래 콜라야 지 가사 칼야 아니 때대바이나 아니 축드야지 마도 아니 개 연구 말았어 아니 지 고음을 잡아야나 믹섬니 가주 대바이나야 믹섬 되나 믹섬 대라세 마도 통자스 기요 말았어 아니 좀 된디 비기 슈단이야 젠체진 젠체진 고음기하기도 왔어 아니 믹대친 아니 제바친이 검잡나 통고야 통고를 했으라 뭐도 믹스는 대대와나 통고하러 왔으라
So the Buddha taught the two truths, and the two truths, on that basis we cultivate the paths of method and wisdom that lead to the attainment of the two bodies of Buddha. So rather than saying that this is something that we have to accept, it is imperative that we accept that presentation. First of all, the approach is to check it out, to analyze, to investigate that. As we have the intelligence of a human being, then we ought to check it out, to investigate it. If it doesn't make sense, it is said that just set it aside. If it doesn't work out for you, set it aside. So we can check it out. We can analyze and investigate to the point in which if we find certainty, then we can go along the path that those teachings present to us based on the two truths, the path of method and wisdom that lead to the state of the two bodies of Buddha. If we haven't found that conviction in those teachings, and we then use different methods or different techniques, it could be that our mind be all over the place in checking different things out. And as such, it's difficult for a mind that is spread all over the place to become really focused and be able to accomplish its final goal. So if a mind is too over the place, checking two different things out, you could say, without developing certainty in one thing, it might be that you still persist in your practice of meditation. You'd be sitting with your eyes closed, but with a mind that is still all over the place and not able to find conviction or certainty in one thing, your spiritual progress will still be limited. So rather than keeping our eyes closed, we want to open our eyes. We want to make sure that our mind sees things as they are. We want to look at something and be able to recognize it rather than to remain with our eyes closed.
제 간주다 디트 트시도 찾다 이나 기억이 말해 단다 간주 신니 드비 갑둘이야 신니 드비 갑둘이야 비기 아니 류그 대단디 땅 간주 콘레 드로스 인지미 미 맞음스 비기게 믹드 마스 밥시네 믹 맞음 믹 첨부마다 믹 베드 좀 마셨으네 nem부 슈송고다스 라 믹 맞음치 아니 신이 두에도 좀 샘기 비기려야 옐로 또바기 제바치에 들어왔어 두스는 줘봐이나 아니 담보 깔려야 직 마대버도 마부슈 통대야도다 세미야야 딘디 용구여서다 타투온디 디 야차고서레스 라 만도 템비 코든딜레야 차란 제다 nga kadin di sangwe tembi number sangi bi tembi ko kandas shamba inya chen zum de yu shangmares chen che de janjan ra penata mindig bi temba do na sobda do be or de inya chen zum ni yor ta dosun nenga chago서레스 ra.
So in the sense of we're digressing a little bit, but it's okay. So with the practice of calm abiding, for example, since we can speak about other points as well, with the practice of calm abiding or shamatha practice, there is an emphasis that is placed at the beginning of on the physical posture that we adopt in cultivating this mode of meditation. And it is said that one of the details in the physical posture is to not sit with the eyes completely shut, not to keep them wide open, but to keep them slightly opened. And the point is that if you keep them wide open, it could lead to quite a lot of mental wandering. So we begin with our meditation on calm abiding. And it is difficult at the beginning. Geshe says, at least for him in his experience, it is difficult at the beginning because when you open your eyes even slightly, there are different things that appear to your eyes. So you see forms and colors and so forth. So it might be easier for the mind, or the mind would be more susceptible at the beginning to mental rumination or mental wandering. But still, essentially, to attain calm abiding, state of shamatha, is to develop a certain mental realization. This is what we begin with. So we begin with adopting a certain mental posture, certain physical posture. We choose a certain thing to focus on with our mind. Like, for example, if you were to focus on an image of the Buddha, then an image of the Buddha is depicted in most cases, if not in all of them, with the eyes open. It's actually quite different to statues that you find in some other Indian traditions where you find beings depicted with the eyes shut, with the eyes closed.
율델이야 숙부슈치로 아니 율 내든 세우 쇼지 차야지 디차원디기 아니 신이 디 낭긴 드드야지 로 준주나노데 something 레우송디 다가라 레샤스 아니 디네피기게 아니 나그나니 송디 다가라 로 아니 주 율그톨이야 상다야 마도지 아니 샘디 인지미 미버질레 대체도지 아니 차단 고세야디 지금 무두바 공연을 소바다 지금 감지라고 공연 뒤 단내급성 레마도 템부디 백하고 제거서래서 비기기다 베나 저주 삼들 레븐도 스마 domja원디 다시 냠세 다시 냠술디 제바친 다시 냠 누구문도 탐지기 대원대바다 탐지기 동하면 돼봐 라 아니 randa shenyi budi kecha di sui me tolaya samlo nete tamba ina yacha kya tamba chagdan mixi gi chagdan gi nimbu shemba jiten chagdan gogo ya mundos daga rangi ani pedi semdi ani pigitol leondi kaso da ji cholong gi sambadi ngangi su duyon ya ji and del deni ani yud tela mi 로 찌치바디 코랑 또 빌려야지. 안 될 때는 디 랭이 집 남주디야 항동대 용해야지. 딘디 송고도 왔어. 디 송고도 왔어.
So then in order to accomplish that state of calm abiding, state of shamatha, we make sure that the mind, first of all, is involved with a certain mode of analysis and investigation. We think of reality. We think of how the object of a meditation exists in order to increase our ability to see reality clearly. And as we do that, a state of calm abiding will develop. So it is rather than attempting to have no object of mind whatsoever, it is through trying to enhance the clarity of a certain object through thinking about it in a particular way. So we can think of different objects that we choose for meditation in a variety of ways. We can, for example, look at the unattractive aspects of a certain object, to go through the classification of different objects, classification of reality. We might do that in a way that is gearing up to the development of wisdom as taught by Shantideva in his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life in the 9th chapter, which is based on the development of calm abiding, shamatha, that was presented in the previous chapter, the chapter on absorption. But still, when we look at the approach of Shantideva to the development of absorption in the 8th chapter of this text, it does that through cultivating a meditation that is called equalizing and exchanging self with others, beginning with meditating on the equality between self and others. So Shantideva teaches the reasons for seeing that oneself and others are the same or equal in terms of seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. And also call into question whether oneself is indeed more important than others, or whether it is not the case that I'm not important than others. So through that mode of analysis and investigation that is supported by reasoning, we start to reduce our anger and attachment, which are partial biased states of mind. So if we reduce that sense of partiality, the partiality of anger, attachment, and so forth, naturally it will also bring about that mental stability, which is necessary for the development of calm abiding. So by working on those factors which are unconducive for calm abiding, reducing them, reducing anger and attachment, naturally, calm abiding will become stronger. So we gather in our anger and attachment, calm abiding becomes stronger, and that acts as a basis for the development of the wisdom of special insight.
Dan tumuwi sanamani pigi ta semni bi tabgoda tindila sobegi shinidribi kalaya yu chadabajilaya ani semteni shinidribsu sungurwas tindi kalaya ta ani gasha zudi ani sem chingu ki ondu masonwa ani yul pigi ya tegosa di ani tembi sonwa disum toni ta shinigomsu sungurwas ta dire Shene gasha zuodi chimanta goba ni botere. Goba tine pe ani ta zo chabagi ani damala soba tindi chojre das. Ta yul chetabajila ya mingni yul chetabajig tola ya samla tani ani chagba doba zamjiki nganzu gyu chagba do tuya kor yo marwas ro. Pena da ji keba doj tindi ji imbaina ani pena pemig lula mingni chagdan gotsu dindi sungoras pen mudugo gomsu la soba ta pame ne kebilu la min mudugo gomsu ta di pigi yul chataba jilaya mingni negab ge chaba thabo do dosure ma do ngone ge chadang ge lodi doya ge tabdi drogumundas ta pigi yul ngubin ne sulti ro nguyu ne su pena ta ji ani medabi ge ranshi dame bi ranshi o dindi ge nguyu ne su di 가주스기 째버째 투어 뒤쪽이 아니 차당글로디 도투야디 디니고도스라 딘스 가주스기 째버째와 뒤쪽이 아니 신니 드비야기 탑야슈디 디 디렌도스라 디 쩐주나라 다 그 비숑 좀 domja운디 티테용도 베나 아니 비기다 규기 송시야온디 아니 조 드네 용도 왔으라.
So looking at a common way of cultivating calm abiding. In scripture, the common method for developing calm abiding, shamatha, is through the 9 stages of mental placement, in which we use a particular object of observation. We place a mind upon that object of observation, and we go through 9 stages of mental placement. Through and through that process, we arrest, we put a stop to either mental excitation or mental laxity, in order to develop stability of mind. So we hone the ability of the mind to stay placed upon a certain object, a particular object, and enhance the stability of the mind. And what hinders the development of that stability are those 2 modes, either mental excitation or mental laxity. So with excitation comes under the banner of attachment. And there are certain methods that we can use in order to reduce that mental excitation. So you might focus on a particular object in order to reduce that, but it's not that focusing on a particular object would be the key, would be the antidote for the elimination of attachment. So just in order to explain that, we can look at, for example, the meditation in which you observe the unattractive aspects of the object that you attach to as a way of reducing attachment. Is it that to observe the unattractive aspects of the object would be enough to completely eliminate afflictions, to completely eliminate attachment? It's not going to be enough. Like, for example, you might be attracted to a woman, and in order to reduce the attachment that you have to that person, you might be meditating on the unattractive aspects of that woman. Or likewise, if you're attracted to a man, then you might meditate on the unattractive aspects of that person. But will that meditation be enough in order to eliminate attachment? It's not going to be enough, because in order to eliminate attachment, you need to use the wisdom that realizes selflessness, that realizes reality, in order to put a stop to afflictive states of mind. And therefore, looking at the method that Shantideva explains in his Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, and first of all, explaining how to develop calm abiding, in the 8th chapter of his guide, in which you reduce sense of attachment and anger and use that as a basis for the development of insight. It is one of the best methods for using that.
대니지 개발했어. 아니 남바다 치와니 개발라스 아니 댐비 개발이어스. 댐비 개발 가르했어. 댐비 개발니 산기니 게메지 용된 졸라. takbuda shenji temba tele dokbate kyabar pagdole dan temba shenbani jomden kyola da kyabchi tejile du shinakyu gyamangala yongden den sheda medik shenji shonlula cheda namsamba teda den gönköla da gisem du tebankyu teda tamjin kemimbi chumti genji laksam den samla namki kemibi temba kyola kyoge mantong shesomba taros.
So we'll continue with the reading of Lama Tsongkhapa's text. So it says, with respect to the difference between the 2 sets, the difference between the teachers is that the Buddha is without faults and has completed the excellent qualities, while other teachers are the opposite to that, or different to that. In the praise of the Exalted One, it says, having abandoned the other teachers, Blessed One, I go for refuge in you. If you ask me why, because you have no faults but excellent qualities. And also, the more I've thought about the scriptures of others, the Tirthikas, the more my faith in you, protector, has grown. Those whose minds are wasted through the faulty tenets of non-omniscience, whose thinking is wasted, do not see. Faultless teachers, not even you.
다들다 dia jadang anju ta sebu samlon neden tangoya samlon neden jimadang bayna ani sigduzo ko lobal lang bayna yabu yo maros ra tanganju gyönda yonden sedi gyönda yonden di nguyul nesul toni ani lo jancheni chagdang go tuwadi yonden res ta di kharchawsne ani dame bi tawati dame bi tawal teni ani chagdang go bi yonden diona ani yonden re di mena kyen res tenza ta di sushego mare di nganzu 딱지친 먼저 심주친 지토해진자 디 신곡을 해서 다 비기게 율무연 내출다 멘튼 비기 따와지 시바이나 디 왕기 아니 로신줄 어떤 로야디 그다 춘이로스 딘티 차니 로원디 원이기 율기 내 가서 무빈 내출 아니 땡퉁인기 아니 땡바텔이나야 아니 견통대 딘지 수수 샘디 아버지 마찬나 딘지 차드워스 딘자 내댕 상로단으로 심주치 거야디 계신부리스.
So this is a section that we ought to think about. Rather than living it like that, we need to think about it, you could say, more precisely. Because here it, for example, mentions the Buddha, mentions that the Buddha is someone that has developed all qualities and has eliminated all faults. So to develop good qualities in this context would be through training in developing an insight into reality. And when we develop an insight into reality, we overcome anger and attachment. And if we're capable of putting a stop to anger and attachment to overcome them, it means that we have that good quality. This is the quality, the good qualities that we are referring to in this section. So the question is, who teaches the way to overcome anger and attachment through developing an insight into reality? Are we taught a path that lead to the overcoming of anger and attachment and a distorted mind that sees reality in a distorted way? And if we follow another set of teachings which compounds our mistakes with respect to reality, in a sense that we might follow a set of teaching that will actually not only not undo the ignorance that we have with respect to reality, but will compound it, will create an erroneous state of mind which misconstrues the way that reality exists. So this is not a good thing to follow, right? To develop that, to have a misunderstanding or distortion with respect to reality is not a positive state. This is not where we want to end up. So therefore, in investigating faults and good qualities and contextualizing what are the good qualities that we seek, we want to develop an insight into reality which puts a stop to anger and attachment. This is the good quality that we seek. Then the question is, what teachers, what set of teachers teach us how to do it, and which set of teachers lead us away from the development of that insight into reality?
어디에 답변이 되는 로스 티지다. 다시바 캡수손을 라버체베를 바세들이 시발니 소줄 랍자던 투몽기 랍자고스 당볼라 가바다 주비 랍자. 사지도 찍어오면.
So then we've completed a third main point in the section that explains the way that we go for refuge. And now we're going to look at the fourth main point in the outline for going for refuge, which explains the training that we take up in going for refuge or having gone for refuge. Let's look at the text. It says the stages of training after having gone for refuge. There are two main points, the actual training and then eliminating inaccuracies with respect to the precepts of going for refuge. We begin with the actual training consisting of two main points, specific precepts for the individual objects of refuge and common precepts for all three objects of refuge.
네, 담보는 양들레스다 돈 양일 대바세 딩기리 간식 숨라 점로와 되는 양다 개념데 남도 하는 샹달라 접소 마이노 담비 출라 점로와 세신 수비 샘다 첼 gendun la ya kyam ro mitik chan da choba min she song ba tar ha shan la kyab sum ro wa ta simjan la ne che pon wa ta mitik chan da ma choba somos dambo nen jigden bil ha chagbo ta kyam juk so la pu ki kyab sum min se na yida su kyuwi shida da lo la ta chu me ten ya kyab sum la yi ma chi ne teda la long ge na mo ro yin ji teda la che ji chön den ji chawang ga shi ki cho so mo ro men no sta se u shu so Pena jendala tsovi choksovatans. Membala nesuvere nechavashenos.
So specific precepts for the individual objects of refuge begin with precepts of what is to be stopped. So precepts of what has to be stopped begins with a quotation from the great final Nirvana Sutra. One who goes to the three for refuge is a perfect approacher to virtue. He will never ever go for refuge to some other gods. One who goes to the Dhamma for refuge is free from the mind to harm or kill. One who goes to the Sangha for refuge does not mingle with the folders. So in accordance with this statement, there are three precepts. The first one is not to go for refuge to other gods. The second is to abandon causing harm or injury to sentient beings. And the third is not to associate with non-Buddhists. Now, the third one says, do not go for refuge to other gods. It says if one does not even regard worldly gods, which here is expanding from an Indian perspective, Rudra or Vishnu and the like, as long-term refuge, there is no need to speak of Nagas and local spirits who belong to the hungry ghosts. In this regard, while it is inappropriate to rely on them from a lack of conviction in the three objects of refuge, it is not appropriate to seek their assistance for some action of temporary character. By way of example, it is like seeking assistance from a benefactor for one's livelihood, or like relying on a doctor in hope for a cure from an illness.
Meda tundru sola digban chingwa kora shuba nabugba mete shindu gewa so sambata jowe nese pamba was.
Now, the second thing that we abstain from in going for refuge is abandoning harm or injury to other sentient beings. And it says, the second consists in abandoning causing harm or injury to humans, animals, and so forth through thought or actions like beating them, binding them, ensnaring them, piercing the noses, and loading them unbearably.
Sumba kunju sumla kyabsu yi mechishin kowa cheba namda.
Now, the third one, not associated with non-Buddhists, is understood to be in not conforming to those who are not convincing that the three jewels are refuges and who denigrate them. Det kan han dreshigamna. Konsola dreshigamna.
Di sajisumbat.
Oh.
Konjosumle yimichishi kurwa cheba namda tumbal mecheba was. Yeah. Jilada kitla islada.
All right, so the third point here says, the third consists in not conforming to those who are not convinced that the three jewels are refuges and who denigrate them. So it comes under the heading of non-associating with non-Buddhists, and just looking at the way that it is stated might imply that we're not allowed to have non-Buddhist friends. So this is not the meaning here. The meaning here is not to associate it with those who will try to convince us to turn away from the three objects of refuge, or might try to promote other traditions or other religions, so to speak, in order to convince us that for us to rely upon the Buddhist tradition is of no use. So not to here, the third precept is not to associate it with those who would take you away from what you chose to do, which is to go for refuge. In general, it's all right to have non-Buddhist friends, but the emphasis here is try to avoid those who might try to take you away from what you chose to follow.
대장안도 참 깝걸이야 그 규론디기 아니 규단 노드라든지 다 연구도 하서라 안 디지그제 닌 디낭로라야 당안주 군조송라야 이질료게진 타와드 탐진gem을 주요 깝라 아니 비 군조송라야 아니 이 메치비 간라야 고원 데브딩기 아니 메드냠도 비 초치니 아니 그 깨정이는 로데바나 안주 레 당보발이야 단지시와는 론규를 레라고 슈저라스 딘지 마치스 가스는 안주 컨트롤에 이치진 딘드르가들 디 이치려야 바치 차기월 여러와스로 마도 최케 meleng에도 베디 야와 돌고선 싸워니니 송고 말았어.
So in this section where it says not to associate with non-Buddhists, or the third consists in not conforming to those who are not convinced that the three Jews are refugees. It might be that either sometimes the translation is inaccurate, or that a certain level of understanding is missing. So it's not that we shouldn't associate it with those who do not trust the three objects of refuge, or do not believe the three objects of refuge. Here it says that those who denigrate them, which means that not only they do not trust the objects of refuge or believe in them, but they will also disparage, criticize, try to make you change your mind with respect to them. So particularly if you still at a stage of a beginner and your conviction or trust is not complete, it is likely that your mind will still be susceptible to others. So at that stage, if you're associated with those who deliberately try to sway you away from that, it is dangerous. So this is what Lama Tsongkhapa speaks here when it says, do not associate yourself with non-Buddhists. It's rather that those who try to deliberately to change your mind, that disparage, denigrate, and so forth the objects of refuge, those are the people that you need to avoid. It doesn't say in general that we shouldn't hang out with non-Buddhist people. Actually, it would be a fault if we neglect them, if we ignore them.
자, 군조스물의 이익 매칭인데, 다 이익 매칭이 들어. 이익 매칭이 고와 제와 디 아니 카당인들이스. 다 디든 통바직 제와이나 아니 소소 군조의 이익 마치와 군조의 카당마스. 디 마치스. 된다 디렌도 디 마치스.
If we rely upon those that either do not trust the objects of refuge, and more than that, they criticize or denigrate the objects of refuge, it is possible that the mind would be influenced by that, and we will also start to behave in this way. So here Lama Tsongkhapa says, avoid that.
Yeah. Then taniba sangi kuzu rimutriba lenyi chindashi lang che mendevshi wejasar masha tensar joboso mukubatan nienta pani tembater kurvishin du sonde shijinle chedar deshi suku shinle kyan kuzu shinle kyan geba chinda rondi kebi chuje sonsos.
So we looked at the precepts of what is to be avoided. Let's look at the precepts of what is to be accomplished or practiced. There are three precepts in relation to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Beginning with precepts associated with the presentation, with the representations of the Buddha. It says, however excellent or flawed paint pictures of the Buddha's body may be, do not disparage them and do not put them on the ground when inconvenienced. Having given up the irreverence of pawning them and so forth and defaming them, regard them as filled of veneration like the teacher himself. It says then in a letter to a friend, the way the learned honor any form of the Sugata, even made from wood.
Di pe kechambu tangal samzu tes yesra shiding di gombuludugi jabu deju sambure. Ani konglaya ani chobo nanza chechin ta jabu pi juche koranta mechadan sonomchi 디 텔다 아니 차리 나샤 그래도 진짜 제대로 대시 군수 신리견 개발 진짜론디 케빈처스 오니기 아니 개발 남주진도스 기브잘 찍다 말이 템비꾸인 버준스 다가랑기 아니 최빈네 송그리스 로 최빈네 송그다 딩오니 레도스로 가징이마 정이 직슈사이 베나 자오르무치 기타 슈샤라야 초시 참gel야 아니 구송 투댕기 강친이 슈도스 드나신 아주 잡지 라마 소버무치 가와 팹나야 감 숨시지도 감 숨시지 사제 가올레는 랑칸 레나 비카올레나 람산 디츠텐치니 아니 조즈 쳔보샤 디간라야 구송 투댕지 디 쳐버비 딘딘는 것도 왔어 들어와.
So Geshe spoke about this point before, and it is an important point. Here, Lamson Kappa quotes a couple of lines that are taken from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. So Nagarjuna was an Indian master, an Indian scholar. He had a close friend, king. I think that the name of the king in Indian language was King Bimbisara, if I'm not mistaken. So he composed a letter to his friend, the king. And one of the advice that he gave the king was the way to the learned or the skilled honor any form of the sugata, even made from wood. So he said that if you're really skilled in the way that you practice honor, veneration, and so forth, you would do so regardless of the material that is used, the substance that is used in order to create those images. So something might be made of wood or stone or gold or what have you. Regardless of the material, a skilled one honors those images and seeing them as being like the teacher themselves. So this is also, you can say, this is something that our teachers show us in their behavior. If you watch teachings given by His Holiness Dalai Lama, and now he gives teachings from his residence in India, from his room, broadcasted online, then you can see that the room, the walls and so forth are filled with representations of body, speech, and mind, the qualities of body, speech, and mind, regardless of the material, the preciousness of the material. All of them seems to be venerated equally. Also, Yamte Lama Sopa, which is the spiritual director of this organization, when he travels overseas, normally there are quite a lot of suitcases that he brings along, and since 3 or 4 of them are dedicated to statues, stupas, and so forth. So wherever he goes, those objects follow him. He arrives at a new place, opens the suitcase, takes out the statues, stupas, and so forth, makes offerings and so forth. These actions show us the importance of developing that sense of veneration.
Lama Sobarambuchegi, Kosong to the Chakbet Samadombegi, Conjo, 9 to your last back. And the Tita Nima Mambushu Pegora, that Pedi, that does some Kigon, that Roson Shuyora. And it Chanzu gear and Romachi Kuji that didn't know going agent card the Mugua card the Chixerosis. And then Romachi said so. Tamadi Chi Malarsa, Sama Kigo Charles, or didn't
Yes, I had a conversation with Roger a few years ago. Roger is Lama Sopa Rinpoche's secretary and attendant. That's like the chief of staff. So, he told Geshe that whenever Lama Sopa Rinpoche travels, and he travels to many places, there is like a massive array of suitcases that have to follow. And they always end up paying a lot of money for overweight, for taking too much things. And Roger had one day a conversation with Rinpoche and said that, please, could you take less things, because we always end up paying so much money for all those things. So Lama Sopa Rinpoche said, all right, I'm going to try to sort out what is important, what's not important, what I can take with me, what I can leave behind. So we're sitting with his suitcases and taking up one text and putting it aside, or one statue, putting it aside, and then kind of trying to decide what is important, what is not important. At the end, after a few hours, all those things ended up back in all the suitcases.
Then the pig don't kashi laya matas. Nanzo di koson to den di any namduna keon digi kedro di all ya simjin kazus yungres. Tazu samalaya gave us agres. Ah, big don't kashi the chinju songs. The digita to something that simjin the 간에는 지금 편도 거랑 시엔 배우여 버디 청구다스 저종원이 제수이랑 이해를 해도 서로.
So Roger has continued the story and said that at the end, Rinpoche said that, well, at the great scheme of things, there are only a few $1,000s that we pay for taking all that luggage. But then, since we're flying from one place to the next and we cover great distances where living beings abide and they live, then you could say that the blessings of all those holy objects, the statues and so forth, spread out to all those living beings. So actually there is a great benefit in doing that, which Geshe says that, when you think of Lama Tsultrim Rinpoche's way of thinking, it seems that his sole concern is the benefit of other living beings.
징들이 초징ning 안주 배 아니 nenga chil야 가려스라디 당안주 냠ning 탈두버디 상가 도지 TV 람 냠ning 쳇 상가 도지 TV 람라야 깨름다 조름 세지 겨다 당이 테스 식세전 되고지 아니 깨름 가샤 조디 타마웨 나완데 셴바세드리스 로 타마웨 나완데 셴바세 당안주 가르치고래 아니 가샤 조디 춘 주야기 쳇드로지 소수 낭라야 균댕 피길이야 소수 대사기 사자 개체사 될이야 고소 투데 만체다 통해 거려 말아서 야 가시 찍니 지샤나모도 될이야 때 마음을 내봐이나 지 배지 됨데 상당하다 괜히 소리지 상당 간지 피기게 사자들 소버차고 소리지 다 될라 가르쳐 그래 피기게 뇨추 로 아니 아라마부 다 딘디 간지 아니 타마위기 비기게 샘 트루드야기 차당 모섬 끼야기 아니 율짱짱 소리지 지게마도 비기 간난 비기 사이 나무르드 차야기 규긴도서 깡쭈니 파 아니 매버 소리지 차르고도 세로 까까라 디 오늘 큐니다 제 마고는 진행사 말했어. 먼저다 감이 야다 쳐서다 자워르모치다 너무 소버모치. 디 많이 비다 계란수 갈리실 주치다. 추규 리스 마지비 라마 깨워 담아도서 빠티 고소도 된 강치니 슈도서 디 피기 상가 도지 대비기 람 냠len다 톰바치 로 가나라에 나오르드 차세기 타블로지 차그도서 상로 가주 땅바이나 디 고니진 깡자레도스라.
And also Geshe reckons that this mode of behavior in some sense is in agreement with the final practice that we want to take up, which is the practice of the secret mantra. So there are different levels to the secret mantra. The practice of highest yoga tantra consists of two stages, the generation stage and the completion stage. Now, in order to put it into practice properly, what we need to put a stop to our ordinary appearances and the clinging to things as ordinary. This is what we need to abandon. This is what we need to eliminate, the appearance of things as ordinary, and also the adherence to them as indeed being ordinary. So then, in thinking of how we arrange, for example, our rooms or houses or whatever, what have you, like His Holiness Dan Lama or Lama Tsultrim and so forth, with things that, with statues and so forth, which do not have those ordinary appearances, it's actually in agreement with this practice of putting a stop to ordinary appearances and clinging to them. And yet, it seems that often when we look at the way that we approach the whole subject of having statues and tankas and so forth, mostly in where we live, we either try to hide them away or we might think that if I do get something, then I better not go overboard. Maybe I should have only one thing, like one statue and so forth. And also, it might be that after a while we get a bit bored with what we have and we throw it away. We think that it's not of no good quality. Maybe I should kind of chuck it out, like chuck it out to the garbage and get something else. Whereas we do invest a lot in other things in our houses. Often we put a lot of money into things which actually support the development of anger, attachment, and ignorance. So you might have a very fancy drink cabinet with very fancy alcohol and so forth, or get other appliances to the house which are supportive, you can say, of still the increase of anger, attachment, and ignorance. So then, thinking about it from the perspective of what is our goal. Our goal is to reach the state of enlightenment. If we then do that through relying upon such path as the second mantra, then if there are certain things that we do not need to have, that we do not need to do, it's best to just leave them aside, to avoid them. So this is, you could say, this is something that is illustrated by what His Holiness the Dalai Lama does, but not only His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When you look at great lamas from all across spiritual traditions in Buddhism, you can see that what they do agrees with that attitude. Particularly if you think of making sure that, for example, you're surrounded by those objects, statues and takans and so forth, which agree with this attitude of the practice of High Yoga Tantra, in which you adopt the mental attitude of not seeing things in an ordinary manner, right? So ridding yourself of ordinary appearances and clinging to things as ordinary, this is an attitude or a practice that accords with the practice of the second mantra.
Terida, Diana Ganzu sound dig that Biglia, Geshe, and Ganzu Sugu, Ganzu culture Maridojita, love cigarettes. Diana D. Benanganzu touch number Sanji Chile, Lojon Chedia, Benanganzu Lomba Dito Jibana, Lomba dig that Sugungi, and it should the Chago Maros. Neanganzu di Muyu Netsujilia. 아니 두고 여봤다 원내게 팬도 여봐지기 임반자 아니 수수수기 멤버이나야 아니 람델에 슈니 호다바다 지고라스 딘자 아니 고송 투된 디야디야 수기는 메나야 소소라 팬도 여봐지나 수기인디 교당 여러스라 어 딘디로 삼다나 간지 팬사를 상고도스라 간지 가월 때네 소소나 레온디 지카 가월 코나야 지 고송 투된 아니 제 대사 여바이나 제바 코란라야 소놈 요레스 소사그레스 숭구도 아스라.
So then in this place you might think that, well, it's not my tradition, it's not my culture, and therefore it's not really suited to me. But still, when we look at that from the viewpoint of developing an interest in the Buddha Dhamma, studying and training in the Buddha Dhamma, indeed it's not our background, in a sense that this is not the tradition that we come from, this is not the culture that we come from, this is all correct. But still, if you find that something is helping your mind, if it's benefiting your mind, then it's good to do it. So for example, if you do come across those representation of the enlightened qualities of body, speech, and mind, statues, stupas, and so forth, and you use them in a way that it's benefiting your mind, then even though we haven't grown up in that culture, even though if it's not our tradition, if it's helping our mind, why not do it? So particularly, on top of that, it is said that even just coming across, seeing or gazing upon those objects is contributing to the accumulation of merit, to the accumulation of the two collections, to the completion of the two collections. So if it is helpful to our mind, when our spiritual goal is to study and train in the Buddha Dhamma, then even though it might be not something that we used to from a culture, if it's helping your mind, why not do it?
토마디 마레스 이나야 아니 야가기체 gyagan tarjuchu di ani chik gyana dam phela soba tarni ani mitsu ta chik pi ta karso da shata rusum la ya tim de ya di karjin charis la on di ganji to ni bi gi an chik chela ya gyurya ani kuson to den de shu ya choden jan ya tsen mane dan ya ganji ani go gyabu ni chini ani tangbu ba tsama lo chö de la ya tona chewal de pen dandi chala ya ani ta na la ya tim de gyuro ro pebi ta na la ya tim de gyuro cha yoros de nanshin jing an no sho bi ta na la ya sanji gi chö di timba ji che go gro was da ro di pen to yo ba yanza di che go gro was ro da di che ba la ya bi gi ji don다 찌그 나눠라야 추주직 삼직 뒤즈다니 냐 직부직이 용약하고 쇼저로 왔으라 간지 토니 비기게 추 달사기 니마 간지 용도 디나신기 콩 텔레뚜그니 딘디기 수경 코란 아니 람루 코란데 추직 다리야기 토라야 배준 제바나 간점질래야 아니 눕쇼비 미기 차가 나눠야나 산직 추 팀로야지 딘데 용거로 왔으라
Looking at countries like Tibet or China, where the Buddha Dhamma that came from India became this indivisible tradition or heritage of those places, to the point in which it seems that it is embedded within the flesh and bones, within the blood of those people. It came through adopting those traditions and cultivating them to the point in which they became the spiritual traditions of those countries, in that everything that they did around the day became something that was involved with the practice of the Buddha Dhamma. So if it's going to help a mind in adopting similar practices, then we need to do them. When you look at the lifestyle of Tibetans and so forth, which are greatly devout, and everything around the day is revolving even in the daily activities around things which do carry this Buddhist spirit, insofar as whatever people do with their activities of body, speech, and mind, reciting different things, taking up, performing different things, physical actions. So many of them are imbued with the spirit of the Dhamma. So then when we look at how it works for us, if we practice for 1 hour once a week, it's probably not going to affect a way of living to the point in which the Buddha Dhamma would be an integral part of our body or who we are. It's not going to enter, so to speak, into a bloodstream. In order to do that, Geshe says it's good to look at how it was done in other places, like in China and Tibet, and work towards also trying to do it yourself, to make sure that whatever you do, the Buddhist way of thinking or the Buddhist practice becomes part of what you do, and that it's like entered into your bloodstream. So through that, you then be forming a Buddhist culture, a Buddhist tradition, even if you live here in Australia.
Thank you so much.
Let's leave it here for now.
Yeah.
Serena? Yeah. Mind only is like the mind only philosophy. All right. So we mentioned karma abiding, and Geshe says that when we have attachment, for example, arising, then we can analyze the object and look at the faults of the object, how the mind perceives them. So it's that way of analyzing and thinking is similar to the mind only school of thought within Buddhist philosophy. Yeah, because the reality of the object, we see that as Now the mind only. Dila kerangi shine gondu kapsulayan di chapa di kewaina chapa gi niembo di mi dokpa gongo gres chik sto ani yu the chapa yu taji shewaina ni chapa yu gi nieba di gombaina na mi dokpa tingen zintene gombaina da chapa yu di semtsan res di tombaina di sensambe tawala ligirbes kurangi midok tingen zingomba ina sensambe tawatone samlotan gogirbes yama sensambe gi tawala ten la bab gogirbes kandichinas
martangege dilagores ngazu bi tachi tomogi sinidru ki kalaya kaukala ani chi chingut doya ge tabten ondi gobadi zo chaba doya ge tabten ondi kaukala muduba tinji gomchen chaba doya ge tabten gi yorwas ani injimi di gomgors lago mardas tabten gi yorwas tam muduba gomsu di pigi ani samtsam rese di 디시고 말았어. 모두 검수디 비긴 아주다 루더나 샤다 주숨니 줘봐임바. 아니 직파 카치나 아니 춘나 라소바 딘지임바. 딘지지 돈 시고 말다 샘장 계시디 시고 말았어.
Well, not quite like that. So first of all, when we cultivate shamatha, come abiding, one of the obstacles that we come across is related to attachment. So in order then to put a stop to attachment, to arrest attachment, we can meditate on the unattractive aspects of the object of attachment, which means that it is a temporary or provisional way of reducing attachment in that particular context of reducing the factors which are not conducive to the cultivation of calm abiding. So this is one way of doing that. Now, if you meditate on the unattractive aspects of the object that you're attached to, is it that you're meditating on it in a mind-only way? Is it that the view that you use for that, or the view that you arrive at in your meditation is a mind-only view? Not quite like that, Geshe reckons, because it says that when you analyze what you attach to, like for example, if you attach to the body of another person, you have a sense of desire to a body of another person, and you investigate the body, then you think of points like the body is made of different things, like for example, of flesh, blood, and bone. If you were to look within different parts of the body, you will find things which are not that enchanting, like for example, when you look at the fluids of the body, then urine and mucus and so forth, those things which are not regarded as very attractive. So when you think about it like that, then it's not that you adopt a mind-only attitude. It's actually the body is indeed made of such substances. It's not that it is only mind.
단지 샘잠비 기타와시에 디양 로가로지레스라 샘잠비 먼저 샘잠슬라온디 샘지레스에서는 권한 노르다스 샘잠비 타와시 갑들이야 최탐지 다 샘기 다니에 잠세지 샘리라고 말했어 샘기 다니에 잠세지 식식거렸어 다 아니 오마비기 타와다 자오로지 이나 자고 말했어 오마비기 시온디 최탐지 샘기 딱서 르이 파딱서마도 유틴 저범에서지 디니바를 캐버슈지어스 이내야 떼식 초진인 저러저스라.
Now, just with respect to the view of the mind-only school, so it might seem just within the when we use the term mind-only, it might imply that all phenomena are just mind, they mean mind. But this is not what the mind-only school promotes. This is not the view. Their view is that whatever exists, all phenomena are the mere entity of mind. So when we look at that, when we compare that to the view of the Madhyamika school, it seems in some degree that they're very similar, if not to say that it might seem that to be the same. So the Madhyamika view is that all phenomena are imputed by mind. All phenomena, no phenomena exists objectively. They're merely imputed by mind. So it might sound similar that the statement of the two schools might sound similar in that on one hand, the mind-only schools say that all phenomena are mere entity with the mind. And the Madhyamika schools say that all phenomena are merely imputed by mind. The statements are quite similar, and yet the meaning is quite different.
Is the Jango Dasra. That was the injimig from the Shigi Tavi Kordi. Jani Pilayachik, Sem Zambigi, Tawa Kandaji Shig do Sagi, Kodi Muyula Chamene, Sem Zambi Tawa Kandaji Shig Yobadi, Koa Chatubaina, Teni Omarangi Bigi Sondan, Teni Tangi, and it Tavi called the Savage of Dredge, Gashatam Yungores. This is the Canada in the cylinder in Baina, Canada Lobjon Chiagi, Chagan Sama Yorwazra, Benju Chedo. Kalin Shujama Kot Soski Nami Leda Sonongi Kangame Tadu Sidige the Jango Resra, the Janga Any Riba number chain loves Lara. Much about the Jambaina, any quad things of which Tig Koadi Pasha Digi Kevachimalaya Tutuyach or didn't Roras in Jimmy.
So those points are quite complicated, which means that we still need to train, to study in order to develop them. To ask ourselves, what, for example, is the view of the mind-only school? And even if this view doesn't accord with reality, still, if we understand well what the view is of the mind-only school, it would be a stepping stone for understanding the view of the Madhyamika Svatantrika school of thought, the middle way autonomy. And we can then use that also later on to realize the view of the middle way consequent school of thought, the Madhyamika Prasanka school of thought. So even if the mind-only school view is not real, it's not reality, still it is helpful. It makes it kind of, you could say that it makes our understanding of other views become better. So anyway, Serena, you brought up this question, and Geshe says that actually kind of looking at your ability to develop an understanding of those topics, it seems that everything works well for you. You have all the conducive conditions for doing that, in terms of having, first of all, enough material needs, having interest in this topic, having the karma and merit that you have accumulated probably in previous life in order to be able to meet this material and become interested in that. So you have the ability to develop a greater understanding of those topics, which come through study and investigation. And just like one Buddhist scripture says, even if I die tomorrow, I still will train my mind today. I will still continue to study today because I'm still placing imprints upon my mind stream, so that if I don't get to realize that in this life, I will still have the imprints to do it, to continue to do that in my future lives.
Kaliardan, Kayo Maradan, Colomba Korangi, Piggy, touching Droson Chembo, Chewasawa Chawandi, and Suzulea, and the Chipugu Putu Mambo, or Dindiavanda, Legagi, Chewa Macha Ranzaredos, the Dindi Mengi Baina, and Chulea, Gauni, Tabani, and Jango Dasra, Tuzuni, the Annie, that Duri Jamra, Piggy. Jambaina and Chudi Gacha Jatam Chud Dingni Chusiach Yungrasra.
And of course, in our lifestyle, it might be that we live in a place that is quite expensive. Australia is an expensive country. It might be that we also will not have a lot of time because we need to work in order to support ourselves. It might be that we have big families with a few kids and so forth. And of course, all of those different factors might mean that we have less time that we can put into a spiritual practice. But if we are not compounded by those different factors, if we feel that this is something that we want to do, this is something that we're interested in, this is something that I can allocate the time to focus on, and I can work hard in order to do that, then we have the ability to do it. We have the ability to do it, and on that basis, certainly Geshe reckons that we can develop a deep understanding, deep knowledge of the Dharma.
Thank you. Lamrim.
All right, so thank you. We will leave it here for now with the final Lamrim prayer. So we'll put it on the screen. So Oli, I apologize for not having time for your question. Maybe keep that aside and we will bring your question up in our next session. So the final Lamrim dedication. For my two collections, fastest space that I've amassed from working with effort that is practiced for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eyes blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be beheld in your loving compassion for all life's Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I've discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart growing up with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and may the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time by even discredited path of enlightenment completed due to wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. Thank you.